Welcome. So my name is Neil Sutherland, and I'm going to be talking about a book I just wrote about the history of Fayoum. So some people have heard of Fayoum and some won't, but after I speak, those that listen will remember Fayoum. So I should talk about the background of how I started writing this book. Because I actually started the Fayoum Museum project about 10 years ago. And I held an exhibit in what's called Casa Sakafa, the Culture Palace in Fayoum, the cultural center, and opened by the governor. And then from there, I had an exhibit at the university, opened by the president of the university. And then for the last 2 years, that was about 10 years ago that the project started. In the last 2 years, I've written this book. And the book's about 1,200 pages. So I had to divide it into 3 volumes of 400 pages each. And so half of it is about Fayoum, 700 pages, about Fayoum directly, and the other half is about what you call context. So if I talk about the Roman period, I'd have to describe who the Romans are, right? But altogether, that's how long it is. And why is it so long? Because I say Egypt has, Fayoum has the world's #1 history. And I actually say recorded history, because there might be some other part of the world, I don't know, China or Turkey, that has a great history. But it's all washed away, right? It's all dissolved. But for some reason, Fayoum, having a desert climate a lot of the time, a lot of the artifacts are still preserved. So it does have the world's #1 history, even though no one's heard of it. So to give an idea of why it's #1, I'm going to ask you to spend 2 seconds trying to think of museums you can list in the world. So I just asked a friend a few minutes ago, and most people can name maybe the British Museum, maybe the Louvre, and if you're in Egypt, the Egyptian Museum. So Fayoum artifacts are displayed in over 100 museums and universities, displayed and studied in over 100 museums and universities, artifacts from Fayoum. So it's unbelievable, right? I should also have a list of what I call superlatives. So you know superlatives means like the most, the biggest, the largest, the oldest. So Fayoum has the oldest farming community in Africa and the second oldest in the world. And the oldest monkeys, first monkeys, and the largest dinosaurs, and the most papyri, the most mummies, the most water wheels, everything. So, and again, more than 100 superlatives. So to put that in context, if you think about the United Nations and how many countries there are in the United Nations, there's over like 100, 200 countries. More than 100 of them have no superlatives, not one superlative, and Fayoum has more than 100. So this is worth writing a book about. And I say, obviously, it's a long history. So it starts, I mentioned the dinosaurs. So the largest dinosaur in the world, the meat eater and the largest plant eater. And then that's 100 million years ago. Then you have mammals, and you have the oldest mammals, and they actually have, why they're famous, there's 200 found so far, they actually have tiny little legs and arms on them as a remnant of when they were originally on the land. And I'll just mention a couple of there's hundreds of fossils, different types of animals, fossils. One, the first monkeys in the world, and then evolving over 10 million years into the first pre-human, pre-ape in the world. So when you think of the oldest human or something, it's not human, but the original ancestor of apes and humans is in Fayoum. And hippos, the first hippos, elephants, everything. So that's the fossil record. And then even before, everybody knows Pharaoh or the dynasties and the Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom. So before that, Fayoum, I mentioned, has the world's oldest farming community after Syria, and obviously the oldest in Africa. So the book is actually called The Lotus and the Lake, and then the subtitle, Fayoum Through the Ages. And why it's called Lotus is because In the Bible, they talk about Noah having 3 sons, and the one who came to Africa was called Ham. Now, Ham actually means lotus. And if you see an aerial photo, it'll be easy, you could go Google right now, and you'll see an aerial photo of Fayoum. It looks exactly, from the air, exactly like a lotus, along with it being, you know, the sacred flower of the area. So think about that. Fayoum looks like a lotus, and Africa is called the Lotus. Okay, so that's the name of the book, The Lotus and the Lake. And it's available on Amazon Books by Kindle Publishing. Okay, so before the Old Kingdom, there was the first farming community in the world outside of Syria. And even before the Old Kingdom, there was a site near the Nile River, but in Fayoum, where they found polished granite vases. So I don't know if you know what that means. That means it has a hardness more than copper. It means the people at that time could not have carved it. And it has the world's oldest dress. And if you went to your nearest shop looking for fashionable dresses, you would buy this one. And it's 5,000 years old, the oldest woven fabric in the world. And then in the Old Kingdom, Snefru built the first true pyramids. Now, there were step pyramids, right, before that, like ziggurats in Sumeria. But the first true pyramids were built in Fayoum, and he built 4 of them. And then moving to the Middle Kingdom, there was 2 famous kings, series of kings, like 1st, 2nd, 3rd dynasty. But one was Senusret, and the other was Amenemhat. And they built what's called the world's greatest engineering wonder of the ancient world. And it's an agricultural irrigation system that modern engineers say was the greatest engineering wonder. The canals, the dams, the pumps. And there's also what we call a maze or a labyrinth, or in Arabic, mataha, where it's considered, were there 7 wonders of the ancient world? It was considered the greatest wonder of the ancient world by all the Greeks who visited Egypt. And it had like 3,000 rooms, every room carved with amazing murals. So that was the Middle Kingdom. And then the New Kingdom, of course, people don't know there isn't really very much history in the New Kingdom. But the most famous king of the New Kingdom, Thutmose III, who was the one who had the empire all the way from the Nile to the Euphrates, had his palace in Fayoum, actually. And then moving to the Greco-Roman period, I mentioned about the water wheels. So they still exist today. There's still 200 water wheels in the agricultural area pumping water onto the farmers' fields. And I said Fayoum has this dry climate where everything's preserved. So they literally found 1 million mummies in the Fayoum. And basically all the papyri found in the world are found actually within the borders of Fayoum. And there's about 30 archaeology sites. I'll repeat that. 30 archaeology sites in Fayoum. And then moving from the Greek to the Roman, during the Roman period, they sort of dredged all the canals and that, and so Fayoum was nicknamed the breadbasket of the Roman Empire for all the produce it produced. And then moving on from there, we're getting close to modern time. There was a period of different Islamic groups, right? It was invaded by the Arabs. And I have a chapter on the Arabs, even though they didn't really have a kingdom in Egypt. But an interesting history of the Arabs. And then the Fatima came, who were actually, there's Sunni and Shia. They were actually a branch of Shia. So there's a chapter on the Fatimids. And then the people called the Circassian Mamluks. And I'll stop for a second and say I try to do in every chapter, I try to do a positive portrayal for all these invaders of Egypt, if you want to call them that, because history books would portray them in a negative light. But I never did that anywhere in the book. I always portray them in a positive light. So the Mamluks, I don't know, I had an image of them as being kind of, primitive people. But but they're actually very, very civilized people. And they're wearing like the latest fashions, and I shouldn't even say it, but there's all kinds of pictures of hot women that the kings married. So it'll change forever your image of the Mamluks or the Circassians. And then finally, the modern period that starts with Muhammad Ali. And again, the agriculture in Egypt was revitalized. So Egypt has this agricultural history for 7,000 years. It has a history of archeology, 7,000 years. It has a history of art of 7,000 years. You wouldn't even believe some of the art that was produced 7,000 years ago, even geometric. And of course, natural history and pottery. So it has this history going back continuously for 7,000 years. And then finally, sort of the modern Fayoum. Not today, but what it looked like about 30 years ago before. You know, some of the old buildings were demolished, but sort of British colonial architecture and that. Okay, thanks for watching.